But I think you got that wrong. That's not what I said. It's not that you're not going to have any effect at all. What I'm saying is that we added significant amount of food to the domestic food supply. And out of that, we experienced a shock. Of course, that's why I was telling you about crop loss in those areas. But the point I'm making is that the extent of crop loss is not as high as people are banding figures around. And that the robust measure that we are putting in place for the flood recovery food production plan will be sufficient to address whatever shock we have. Let me take, for example, the case of rice. Most of the areas that are impacted by the flood are areas where they grow rice. Now, I saw something in the newspapers where the rice processors were saying that about maybe 1.2 million metric tons might have been affected. Let's take that figure for whatever it is. Okay, let's just for the sake of the argument. Now, for us, within the food production, flood recovery food production plan, Mr. President has approved for us to import and to complement domestic seed supply of a total of 14,800 metric tons of rice seed. That is enough to plant, close to about 330,000 hectares of rice land to give us a production of about 880,000 metric tons. In the dry season, in the Northwest, we are focusing on doing 230,000 hectares of dry season for rice. And taking that together in terms of production, which would be about 500 and something thousand metric tons, will give us 1.3 million metric tons of rice. So all I'm trying to tell you is that the plan we are putting in place is robust to respond to any shock we have. And perhaps as we go into the first quarter of the year, I know there's always that anticipation that will be, hike in price, but I think that the measure is enough to address the shock we have. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, I get your point. I get your point very clearly. But what I'm looking at is if you say, let's say, like you said, the numbers, 1.2 million metric tons, if we say that we've lost ground, the flood has not completely receded. So even if you bring in the seeds that will be planted, it's going to take a while to get the ground prepared and for it to plant again. The loss is there. Then to begin to do it all over again, it's going to take time. It will not happen in a week or in a couple of months. It will take time before all of these things come back to normalcy.
No, let me come in there.
Yes.
No, let me come in there. That's not correct. That's not correct. Because we, trust us, I'm not a journalist, I'm an agriculturist. Okay, so what we're doing is we already have satellite images of these areas. We know the extent to which flood water is receding. I've broken it down to you for 4 things. In responding to the issue nationally, it's not just those farmers that are affected. Those that are affected, as soon as the flood water recedes, some of them, the flood water has actually receded enough for them to go back. That's why we are actually in an emergency mode to get seeds and fertilizers out. Now, in the same states, as I said, where you have inundation, but you have vast amount of areas that are actually not affected, we are going to give the farmers in those areas the improved seed and fertilizers to double up production so they can compensate for food production loss in their own state. Remember, vast amount of Nigeria's arable land is not affected. We are going to double up on providing improved seed and fertilizers to farmers in all other states that are not affected, so we can boost our production. And then we can have enough food if we have to move to areas that are affected. So you can't just look at a singular thing of just the farmers that are affected. You have to look at the entire robust plan. And we are working on it. Right now, I'm actually calling a meeting for all the commissioners of agriculture next week, on Friday next week, to discuss the plan with them, working with the farmers associations, working with the state commissioners and the governors, of course, on delivery of this plan on ground. So we are working actively on this.
Okay, Honorable Minister, you have said that all state directors of agriculture must take inventory of all farmers affected by the flood. But you yourself, in opening, said that Nigeria didn't have data. So how easy is it going to be for them to actually get this information which you require to deal with this matter as you plan to?
Very good point. You know, when we started, at the start of the administration, we decided that we must know the number of farmers we have. And that was why we started with developing a database of our farmers. So far, we have roughly 4 million farmers in that database. And that was why we launched the electronic wallet system in which the farmers will get their improved seed and fertilizers via their mobile phones. And by the way, that's the first time that's been done in Africa and perhaps anywhere in the world in terms of using mobile phones for subsidy delivery to smallholder farmers for inputs for seed and fertilizers. Now that has now helped us tremendously because we launched that over 140 days ago. We have reached well over 1.2 million farmers right now that are all collecting their improved seed and fertilizers. That is a database there that we have of those farmers that we can reach. Now, secondly, is that in terms of the 3.94 million database that we have, we know where those farmers are, we know their farm sizes, and we know how much inputs they will need. That's what we are going to use for the targeting. Now, if you take the farmers that are in the camps, it's not everybody in a camp that's a farmer. We are going to actually register the farmers that are in the camps. My team is actually on the field right now to know how many are they, how much farmland did they have, and how much inputs do they need. We will register them and use vouchers for them to be able to receive the inputs. Remember, when Mr. President approved for us to do an emergency program, I've got to make sure that in emergency there's accountability and transparency in delivery. The key is to target properly, and we have this database and also the IT platform that we use for the electronic wallet, so we can actually target these populations better, and that's the power of what we actually developed.
Let me just ask you very quickly. You mentioned a figure now that sounds quite promising. When you say that you've been able to reach 1.4 million farmers, and you've got those people on your database. I'm then wondering, how many farmers do we have in a nation of 160 million? Do you have an estimate?
Well, you know, there are all kinds of things that people say about number of farmers we have in the country. And, you know, unfortunately, Nigeria does not have what you can call a database of farmers. Everybody living in a rural area is not a farmer. And the fact that people just simply say, well, you know, 70% of people are in rural areas and X% of them are farmers, is just not correct. You know, we are working now with the state governments to develop a more robust database of farmers using our cooperatives, using commodity associations, and so on to register our farmers. So under the electronic wallet system, we say we are going to do roughly about 5 million farmers, you know, probably every year. So it's a gradual process, you know, between us, National Bureau of Statistics, National Planning Commission, we will get there. But for what we are doing right now, I think that the database we have is sufficient to address the problem at hand.
But you still haven't answered the question. Do we have a guess estimate? Do we have an estimate of any sort in terms of the numbers? Because you said it would be wrong to assume that 70% of Nigerians live in the rural areas, so certain percentage will be. What is the estimate that the federal government is working with?
Well, you know, you get, you know, different types of estimates go between 10 million, some people say up to 14 million farmers that we have across the country. But as I said to you, you know, those are not farmers that we have registered, you know, and this is why we have to plan properly. You know, we can't just keep using guess estimates. We must know exactly how many farmers. Let me tell you what we're doing. We've done for the database we developed. We got the Cassava Growers Association to register their farmers. We got the Rice Farmers Association to give us a database of their farmers. The Cocoa Farmers Association to give us those that are doing oil palm. So that's what we are doing. When you're in business, of course, you're in business, so you know you have to know your customer because you have to deliver services for them, not just improve seed and fertilizer, but finance. So it's a work in progress, and I think we need to do a better job of refining that data so we actually know how many farmers do we have, how many large farmers are there, and how much smallholder farmers are there, and how can we target them better. So, you know, I'm not going to say we are there, but we are working on it.
Yeah, Honourable Minister, this is in parenthesis, really. regarding what you had said earlier. This last Salah, which is only last week, the prices of foodstuff, ram, everything went up. In fact, there was a day that there were no tomatoes in the market, at least in Lagos, at all, and we were all told it was due to the flood. I would like your comment on that.
Well, the issue of the Salah, in fact, when people look at prices, first and foremost, remember that when you have festivities, people try to make a lot of money. That's just the nature of business. Prices are generally high. So I'm not surprised that people say that prices are high when you have festivities. That's the way it is. Whether it's Christmas, whether it's Salah, it's always like that. Secondly, is that don't forget that we continue to have security challenges in the country. Mr. President, as you know, is actively on top of that particular situation because that has created a dislocation in terms of supply of food from the north to the south. You have areas in the north that have produced a lot of tomatoes, and they've got glut over there. They can't move it because the buyers from the south can't go over there because of fears and anxieties to bring those things down to the south. So there's that part of the dislocation of the food supply itself. And third is that bear in mind that even for things that we import, we are not the only country going through a shock. United States just went through a massive amount of drought, the worst in 50 years. Right now they're going through flood, but the current flood is not related to your question, but the drought is related to your question, and also to the floods and drought they're having in Europe. So basically, as a net food importing country,